Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here for this town hall discussion, Spotlight Ukraine. In the last week, NATO has rung a very loud alarm bell. President Putin, it said, is preparing for more war, just as the West seems to be running out of the ammunition and weapons that Kiev urgently needs. So just how dangerous is the current situation, and where might the conflict go from here? To discuss these questions, I'm joined by senior political figures from across the Western Alliance. Mateusz Morawiecki, who's Prime Minister of Poland, Katarzyna Kolona, who's Foreign Minister of France, Alexander Kubrakov is Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for Restoration, and Mitch McConnell, Republican Senator for the state of Kentucky and Senate Minority Leader. I gather you're also the longest-serving Senate party leader in US history. Is that right? Anyway, the Swedish Prime Minister couldn't be with us, unfortunately, but welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. Alexander Kubrakov, let me start with you. We had a very impassioned plea from President Zelensky today to speed up arms supplies, speed up weapons deliveries. How critical is the situation?
I think the situation is always critical, and I think our allies not a mistake. But if you ask me what I'd like to change, I think first of all we are always trying to catch up Russians, and they are setting up agenda. When situation becoming critical, we receive an anti-tank ammunition. Then we receive an artillery, NATO standard 155. Then again we're trying to catch up and receiving air defense. Then. I think President absolutely right when he's trying to say that speed is critical, because during this period of time we are losing people, our best people.
As you said, lives depend
yes.
on speed.
You're absolutely right. Just two examples. Yes, questions regarding fighting jets. It's complicated, critical. But why we can start training program for our pilots at this moment? It will be a strong signal for Russians, for everybody. Again, more complicated questions. Russians, they're using each day cluster ammunition, phosphorus ammunition, each day. Again, it's complicated, but our people dying in Bakhmut. It's almost, you cannot resist to this ammunition, to this type of ammunition. Why we can use it? I mean, it's our territory. I understand how it's complicated, all these conventions, but we can use to resist them on our territory to use such ammunition. Our countries, our allies, US, many other countries, they have millions of rounds of such type. Why and again, we will wait, and then in one day probably we will receive such type of ammunition. But again, we will lose.
The question is whether it comes in time.
Thousands of people.
In time. Yeah. To add to the sense of alarm, the Washington Post reported this week that a senior US administration official had raised the issue of limits to what America can supply for this war. We will continue, said the official, to impress on the Ukrainians we can't do anything and everything forever. Do you find that worrying?
I think there are technical limitations. I understand that it's huge war, 1,000 rounds we are using each day, and we are receiving more from another side, from Russian side, because they have huge reserves. They have Iran on their side. They have some other countries. They have more reserves. They prepared to this war for many years. We can assume that probably there are some technical limitations, but I don't believe in such. I still believe that our allies, US, they're doing all the best from their side in order to provide required volumes.
Mateusz Morawiecki, seen from Warsaw, does the West, does NATO have the will and right now the capacity to give Ukraine what it needs to win?
Well, I hope so. And by the way, I don't buy this logic of, we've given enough and then let Ukrainians do their job. Well, they are actually dying on the front line, and they are doing this for their own sovereignty and freedom, but also for our security and peace in Europe. So if we want to have, and we do want to have all of us to create a long-lasting development, climate, and peace, we have to change the logic. We cannot say, well, Ukraine cannot be defeated and Russia cannot win this war. This is wrong. We have to say Russia must lose this war and Ukraine must win this war, because that's a change of mind. And you asked about the United States. Well, like, if the United States want to stay a superpower, and they already, our friends from America already encountered some defeat in Afghanistan, they cannot allow for yet another defeat in failure in Ukraine. So I think that Ukrainian soldiers, Ukrainian government, President Zelensky, they are doing all possible to win this war, and we have to do all at our end to support Ukraine to win this war.
Will you supply the F-16 fighters? I gather your president isn't too keen on that.
We have pretty few of them. We have not too many of them, but we do agree on delivering jet fighters, other type of jet fighters which are in our possession, together with the others, together as part of NATO decision. By the way, Poland delivered already 250 tanks, and on top of those we are going to deliver 60 quite modernized tanks, and on top of this pyramid we are going to deliver 14 Leopard tanks. So probably the biggest numbers of armored vehicles and tanks was delivered from Poland.
Catherine Colonna, how long do you think the West can continue to supply Ukraine at current and projected levels for ammunition and weapons?
As long as it takes would be my answer. You heard President Macron today saying that we wouldn't like to see this war going on for so long, but we are ready to support Ukraine as long as it takes.
As long as it takes to do what?
This is not to do what we're doing. That is
to win?
As defeating Russian aggression.
As the Polish Prime Minister said.
I could echo what the Prime Minister said, and doing what we've been doing since the very first day, helping Ukraine, both by the economic aid we're giving, humanitarian, name it, there are so many aspects, and military, and we just decided all together to do more and to do it swiftly, so we can really be side by side with Ukraine, so we can not only resist this aggression, but succeed in the military surge we expect to see in the near future.
However long that may take.
I don't know.
No, I'm saying your commitment is for however long that may take.
Yes, as long as it takes.
There's no end point to that, as far as you're concerned. Mitch McConnell, when President Biden says the US will stay the course with Ukraine, what do you take that to mean?
Well, first, I don't know who that quote was that you started this discussion was from the Washington Post, but that's obviously a person who doesn't know what they're talking about. So let me just tell you what the people who are actually elected to office and who actually make the decisions about how long America is committed to this think Russia has to lose in Ukraine. And we can't put a time limit on it. But the one thing we can do to address the problem that was raised by our friend here from Ukraine, speed up the decision making. Get the weapons there quicker. The whole defense production throughout NATO is under stress. There's no question about it. We're providing a lot more ammunition and weapon systems than we were anticipating. But we need to speed it up to cut through the bureaucracy, get you the weapons you need as soon as you need them so you can win the war. So as far as I'm concerned, and I think I can speak pretty thoroughly for most of the members of my party in Congress, we're in this to win because losing is not an option. Imagine how much it would cost all of us, if Russia won. And what about the implications in the Far East? When the Prime Minister of Japan said the single most important thing you can do to send a message to President Xi is to beat Putin in Ukraine, you know that this has worldwide implications. So we need to change our thinking Bob Gates, who was one of the great secretaries of defense in the United States, served under both Bush and Obama, said that after the Cold War, we all took a holiday from history. We thought we're never going to have evil on full display again. Everything's going to be just fine. Well, evil is back. And peace through strength is the only way to deal not only with the present, but with the future.
Can we talk? Can we talk a little bit about the prospects one day of peace negotiations? Mr. Kubrakov, President Zelensky says this war will end only when all Russian forces leave Ukraine, when your territorial integrity is restored, and a special tribunal is set up to try Russians accused of war crimes. Do you think that President Putin will ever agree to those conditions?
I think it doesn't matter whether he agree or not. I think we have to deoccupy all our territories. We have to restore our border. We have to bring normal life to our country. It doesn't matter who will be. It will be Putin or not Putin, or will be somebody instead of him. I mean, we have to do our job with our allies. They have to lose.
But you're saying that there will be no diplomacy ending this war. This war ends on the battlefield. Is that right?
Yes.
As far as you're concerned. Catherine Colonna, should Ukraine be fighting and talking peace at the same time? Is that possible?
Not for the time being. Now, there is a road to peace, and President Zelensky has always been looking for dialogue and looking for peace, including recently, but that's not the first time he's talking about dialogue and peace, including with the 10-point peace point presented at the G20 in November. And the road to peace, according to me, is paved with a few milestones. The first one is unity. And it is important that from this conference comes a message of unity and determination to go on as long as needed. Second, we must make President Putin realize that he did make a mistake. This happens. He did make a blatant mistake. Things didn't work the way he thought they would. Kiev didn't fall in 48 hours. Ukraine was able to take back control from Kherson, and again and again. NATO is about to be launched. The Europeans have been united. I could go on with a long list. Thirdly, we have to make clear that there will be something after the war, and I think Ukraine is looking for it. But the precondition to that is for this aggression to be defeated. There's a precondition to any possible evolution to a second phase. There will be a second phase. War do end, always. But we're still, unfortunately, in the first phase where there must be something visible. So hopefully a second phase can be, started.
Mitch McConnell, the chair of the US Joint Chiefs, General Mark Milley, said this last week that he still believes this war will end at the negotiating table, with neither side likely to achieve their military aims. How widely do you think that view is shared in Washington?
Well, I think it's always difficult to predict exactly how a war is going to end. What we have here is a clear case of one country invading another. And until the Ukrainians have a contrary view, my view is they ought to determine on what terms the war ends. And at least so far, what I hear you saying, and what I hear your president saying, is that's when you get your country back, is when it ends. So I don't think we ought to be negotiating a solution for the Ukrainians that they may not be able to live with. I think our goal, particularly immediately, get them what they need, get it to them as rapidly as possible, and give them every chance to win.
And the Ukrainians stay in the driving seat when the negotiations start, if the negotiations start.
Look, I think the definition of victory ought to be left up to those who are affected by it the most. In other words, I'm not in favor of all of us ganging up and forcing a solution onto the Ukrainians that they may not be able to live with. So we ought to focus on right now, getting them what they need to win the fight.
Mateusz Morawiecki, Zelensky has put his demands on the table. We mentioned some of them. From Poland's vantage point, are they realizable?
I believe so. I think things which were beyond our imagination at the beginning of the war started to be realizable, doable. At the beginning of the war, there were countries hesitating sending helmets or bulletproof vests to Ukraine. Then we sent armored vehicles, and then Leopard tanks, and then Patriot systems are now in Ukraine. And now we talk, and you ask me about fighter jets. So I think that everything is possible, and even I can imagine that the accelerated path for Ukraine to the European Union is also a very important prerequisite for not only keeping up hopes for the Ukrainian nation and soldiers, but also providing Ukraine with a longer-term strategy and vision of Ukraine being part of the European Union. So yes, and I would only echo what Senator said about the potential scenarios of getting out of this war. This is all up to Ukraine, how to define victory, victory, and how to define the scenario of peace.
You talked about Ukraine's application to join the EU, and it wants to join NATO as well, of course.
Yes.
Do you think these applications should be fast-tracked?
I think so. Well, if we want Ukraine to be part of a stable system of free world, and Europe in particular, we don't want Ukraine to be a buffer zone, a zone of clash between different systems. And for this to happen, we need Ukraine as part of the European Union and as part of NATO eventually as well. And from our point of view, the quicker the better.
During a visit last week to Brussels, President Zelensky told the European Council President Charles Michel he wanted accession talks to open this year, saying it would motivate the country and the army. This year, Charles, when I say this year, I mean this year, 2023. Catherine Colonna, did that message get through?
The message is getting through. The reality will be that the Commission will make, as it is planned and agreed, an assessment this spring, then deliver into a paper this fall, and then we shall see. We really opened the door to the recognition of the status of being a candidate to Ukraine. I think France played a key role then. Forgive me for reminding that. We were chairing the rotating presidency of the Council of the EU. President Macron traveled to Kiev just a few days before the Commission delivered its opinion on that accession. Then we have to follow the path. It is a long merit-based path. I think President Zelensky acknowledged that reforms must be done, and that we shall see down the road what this assessment will be in the fall, and see from that.
So this could take years, you're saying?
Or not. Depending on the merit is the only rule we have to follow.
But doesn't it bother you at all that while the EU acknowledges that Ukraine is fighting and dying for things that Europe believes in, at the same time it's telling President Zelensky, well, that's all very well, but we have our rules and our bureaucracy and you have to follow that. Ukraine is fighting a superpower for its very survival. Shouldn't it get fast-track membership just for that, if not for everything else?
Forgive me to disagree with you. It has nothing to do with bureaucracy and everything to do with the accession process that everybody is aware of, and that means that the country who want to join are most welcome to join, and we did open the door, I repeat, have to do what is necessary to come closer to us and then join. Everybody knows that this is the rule of the game.
Mr. Morawiecki, you wanted to comment on this?
I think that we now observe a completely new situation around us. There was any full-scale war since the end of the Second World War in Europe. And this should let us to think out of box. And yes, there is a lot of red tape, lots of red tape in Brussels, and business as usual type of considerations with regard to the accession process. Whereas I do believe that we have to be brave today. We have to go on this accelerated path because things which are happening in Ukraine are of extraordinary nature. What is happening there will shape the future of Europe for decades. And we cannot pretend that this is a normal conflict, as many of them were before in Europe. This is why I was happy, well, I was first saying in March, let's give candidate status for Ukraine, which several countries said definitely not over my dead body. Hopefully it happened thereafter quite soon, because in June 2022 we have accepted this candidate status. But today we need to have a very accelerated path.
Mitch McConnell, what about Ukraine joining NATO? Should that be an accelerated path now?
Well, job one is to win the war. And let's go back to the point you made. This has implications far beyond the current conflict. Huge implications in Asia. We all know the PRC covets Taiwan. So just for a moment, let's take a look at Asia. Our Secretary of Defense was recently in the Philippines, negotiating new arrangements with them. The Japanese, much like the Germans, have completely changed their post-World War II view of the role that they ought to play in the world in a positive direction, almost like an unofficial member of NATO out in Asia. So the stakes here are even beyond just Europe and even beyond just the future of your country. This has to do with standing up a mechanism, an alliance, to deal with the biggest threats we have, and they're basically China and Russia.
Talking of high stakes, Putin has already rattled the keys of his nuclear missiles, and the West has stepped back, anxious not to escalate the war and push Putin into pressing the button. Has it been right to do that? Is that not giving in to nuclear blackmail?
Well, how many times has he threatened to do things since the war began? You can't make the Ukrainian strategy or the NATO strategy dependent upon what Putin claims he might do. Then he's determining how the war is conducted. I think we're, with all due respect, all of these hypotheticals are interesting discussions, but for those of us who are actually voting on these matters, I think we need to focus like a laser on what's needed right now, and it's getting the Ukrainians the weapons they need as rapidly as they can, because winning is the answer to this. Winning is the answer.
Very briefly, because we're running out of time, can we just look to the future? Catherine Colonna, how does France think this war will end?
How?
Yeah.
By a discussion whenever Ukraine is ready, on the terms that Ukraine decides to put on the table. And we are here to help Ukraine to be in that situation where all of us can envisage that we reach that phase where a new cycle begins, I repeat. But in order to have that, let's call it political perspective, strength is needed. Strength is needed. And this is why we're speeding up what we're doing. And we need to deliver what we have to deliver swiftly. And we need to focus on those armaments that Ukraine needs, i.e. mostly for the time being, but correct me if I'm wrong, Alexander, artillery, ammunitions, and air defense. The debate about the rest can be there. It is not exactly what Ukraine needs for time. And we need to be there in due time so they can build on whatever help we give and have that military surge that might change the focus and might change maybe the view that Mr. Putin has of his own situation.
All right. Mateusz Morawiecki, a very quick answer, please, because we're running out of time for this section. Poland warned for years about Russia's aggressive intentions, and no one listened. In your view, has Moscow's appetite for expansion been sated or stimulated by the experience in Ukraine? Is Putin still a threat to Poland, the Baltic states?
Absolutely so, but it depends. The answer is it depends on the outcome of this war. We want to hope for the best, which is a rapid defeat of Russian troops, but we have to be patient. We have to count with long-lasting conflict, and this is why I'm a bit unhappy when I hear voices of, calls for a quick negotiation process to be finalized by Ukrainians. They know best what it means for their future. But I believe that the public opinion in Russia is different than our public opinion. Putin is different, and they have lots of patience. We have to have lots of patience in terms of this conflict. Unfortunately, this means that for longer term we have to be able to deliver weapon, more supply, more humanitarian aid. This is what would be my thinking about the near future.
Alexander Kubrakov, what kind of Ukraine do you see emerging from this war when it finishes?
I think first of all we need to win this war. We have very complicated winter, our people suffering, but again I'd like to remind that all these ideas regarding negotiations, we already had this experience. Russian will use to strengthen their army, to produce more rounds, weapon, and to start again. So we won't agree, and we have all researches, all surveys, they're showing that 90+% of our people, they're ready again to fight till the end, before we win the war. After the war, I think Ukraine will be part of European Union, and I think our army will be one of the most trained and strongest army, which will be part of NATO after the war.
And you think you'll be living in a much more dangerous world next to Russia after this?
I hope that it will be different war with another people in Russia, running Russia.
All right, thank you very much indeed. And we're going to close that part of the discussion now. But and we'll take some questions. I think the Swedish Defence Minister has a question. If we can get a microphone to him, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for a fascinating discussion. Sweden is currently holding the EU presidency. Rest assured, our top priority is support for Ukraine, economic, political, humanitarian, militarily. Now, I have a question for the Prime Minister of Poland. Thank you for your leadership in supporting Ukraine and also for hosting the training mission EU-MAN Ukraine. That's good. Now, the challenge we have is that we're all digging deep into our stockpiles and our military resources are not unlimited. So I'm wondering how Poland is thinking about how and when you're going to be replacing the military capabilities that you're sending to Ukraine now due to the pressure on the European defense industrial base. Thank you.
Well, thank you for this question. First, let me express my happiness from the point of view of Sweden and Finland joining NATO. That's quite a change for NATO. Putin would have not expected.
If Turkey lets it happen.
I think they will, but that's quite a change. From the point of view of all the stockpile and all the weapons which we have delivered, we are changing our industry. We are creating new technology lines to replace the weapon which we would have sent to Ukraine with new weapon. A good example is Haubitsa Krab, which we've sent to Ukraine. They are very good on the battlefield, and we have accelerated production of them domestically. We are buying new ones from South Korea, and we have put even more orders with the United States companies to deliver HIMARS and other type of weapon. But all in all, I know there are shortages of ammunition, shortages of lots of weapons, and this is why collectively in Europe and in the United States and in Japan and other free world countries, there is lots of, waking up from this geopolitical slumber and creating new options, new possibilities to produce more ammunition, haubicas, and new weapons of different kind. And this is what we are doing. And we got some gap fillers on replacing this type of weapon which we've sent to Ukraine. And yes, this is race with time to some extent. So it's a challenge. It's a challenge for Poland as well. But we do want to be generous and quick in delivering weapon to Ukraine, because this is where the fight now happens.
Any other questions? Lady here in the front. In the front row. Thank you.
Thank you. Ulrike Franke from the European Council on Foreign Relations. I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into this question of EU accession, because, Prime Minister, you said we should be brave. This shouldn't be business as usual. So I understand that this isn't about the Commission picking up the phone more quickly and answering to emails more quickly. So this is about real concessions in the accession process, right? Could you point to things that we, in your opinion, could actually do without and could abandon? Like, what are the compromises that the EU would really need to make on the kind of accession steps? Because, as the French Foreign Minister pointed out, there are certain rules and there are certain chapters that one needs to open and to close. So what exactly are you pointing at that we could do without? Thank you.
Ukraine is fighting today for the most critical, most important values, European values, free world values like freedom, independence, right to live, and those type of values. So we cannot confront what is happening in Ukraine with a normal or almost normal process of accession. Either we start thinking in a new way, out of box. These times are, we live through the turning moment in history, and we have to change almost everything in Europe, and we have to therefore create a new process for Ukraine. Accelerated path is a synonym for this, but what may it look like, I'm not so sure. If you ask me if I was in favor of abandoning the normal route to accession, my answer is yes, of course yes, because what is happening before our very eyes is something completely strategic and extraordinary, and we cannot let this country negotiate as if it was a normal candidate to the European Union. Turkey applied, if my memory serves me right, applied to the European Union in 1963. So the negotiations went quite on, and there was lots of procrastination and delays, and lots of bad happened in the meantime. This is why I think those lessons have to be learned from the EU history, and I think about a completely new process.
Catherine Colonna.
Yeah, just an addition maybe to what the Prime Minister said. I think it is out of scope and out of reach to abandon, a precondition. And Mr. Zelensky would support me in saying that reform is needed, whether it is, the legal system, the judicial system, the fight against corruption, so many things. So the question is not so much to lower the level and do a sort of a mini accession, but I'm happier when I'm in agreement with the Prime Minister of Poland to do what he just said we should do and will do and are doing, that is accelerate, help Ukraine to come and join us as soon as possible. And this is partly what we're doing with the European political community. the first meeting was in October, the second meeting would be in June in Moldova, and part of the idea is not only to be a group of 44 countries, and a look at the map is interesting, but to design some programs that could be accelerators, pre-accession programs, whether it is energy, transport, so many other things. And this is a big way to help. And I think this is part of the reasons why Ukraine from the very first day supported that idea.
Your reaction to that?
I think we are in a very complicated situation because we are in parallel fighting on battlefield with Russia and trying to implement it in a very high speed, just all these reforms. And I think, I hope that evaluations this year will be positive and we will open this process.
All right. Lady there in the front row. Excuse me.
Thank you. I have a question to Mitch McConnell. Mathematically, our military already defined, jointly with American partners and other partners, what is needed for Ukraine to win, what kind of equipment is needed to win. And militarily, it is important to have modern fighter jets. Without modern fighter jets, we are not able to win. And without taking back Crimea, we are not able to win. And absolute majority of Ukrainians want to get Crimea back. Moreover, world food security depends on capacity of Ukraine to get back Crimea and unblock Black Sea ports. So it's the fate not only of Ukraine, but of 350 million people who are in hunger. However, in news, we are hearing that President Biden said no to F-16, and there were publications, no to Ukrainian military, even thinking now to take back Crimea. When do you think, Senator, this opinion in the US will change? Thank you. On F-16s and Crimea. Thank you.
Let me make sure I understood the question. What was the question about whether I think getting Crimea back should be a condition?
When the attitude will change to that.
Should be a condition for ending the war?
Yeah.
Well, my answer, as I said earlier, I think the Ukrainians are best able to determine what they can live with. And there's no question the Crimea was taken without much of a conflict. But in the end, I think the parties to the war ought to decide the terms upon which the war ends. The Ukrainians have to live in Ukraine, and as long as you're willing to fight for your country, and it's not costing a single American soldier's life, and what we're doing is providing, listen to this, the money that we've sent to you so far is 0.02% of our GDP. In order to give Ukraine a chance to live in freedom and to prevent the Russians from being emboldened by a successful outcome in Ukraine, which further emboldens the Chinese, which are an enormous threat to us and to all of you. So I'm not here to dictate the terms upon which this ought to end. I think that's up to you and your government to determine what you can live with in the end.
Question was also about the F-16s. Why not give them the F-16s?
If it was up to me, I would.
You would?
I would, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Who's next? Question right at the back. Lady right at the back.
Thank you. My name is Gesine Weber from the German Marshall Fund of the US in Paris. And I would like to know, as the stocks of European states are, as it is a bit underestimated how consuming this war is in terms of capacities, and if we see stocks running low, is that at one point maybe going to be a point where also the EU member states might nudge Ukraine in the direction of negotiations?
Would you like to answer that?
I think I would have Thank you, sir. I would give the same answer as the Prime Minister Poland did. We have to adapt, and we are adapting our economies. They were not designed to produce, by masses, those armaments that we get the technology high enough to protect ourselves. So we did that shift already in the spring. At least I'm speaking for France, but I think all of us did that, have to do that, and we're producing faster. I mean, it is not super magic, but much faster. Those CSAR you will get, those additional CSAR you'll get soon, can be delivered because we've speed up the industry, and we are all doing it.
Any more questions? We'll take two more. Gentleman there. Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Go.
Thank you very much. My name is Alina Polyakova. I'm the president and CEO of the Center for European Policy Analysis in Washington. Thank you for everyone's comments, and thank you, Prime Minister, for your leadership. What concerns me is that I don't hear the Western Alliance speaking in one voice. I've heard the Prime Minister say that our goal, our policy is to win. I've heard the Senator say that we need to aim to win. I don't hear that clarity from a lot of other allies in those direct terms. And I think what we see now as a result of that ambiguity is that we haven't actually given Ukraine what it needs to win. But we're telling them, we want you to win, but we're not going to give you Patriots, because it's escalatory in March, but not anymore. We're not going to give you HIMARS, because it's escalatory at the beginning of the war, but not anymore. So I don't see what our actual policy is, not a Polish policy, but what is the Western vision for Ukraine, and why can we not hear every single ally say our goal is to win? Because if our goal is to win, then we will give Ukrainians everything they need now. What we're setting ourselves up now, I'm sorry to use the word, is a forever war. Because we're giving them just enough to survive, but not to win. And I think this is the problem that my Ukrainian colleague was pointing to here. So I would like to hear everyone on the panel respond to that.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You've said it better than I could have. They need to be given the weapons they need to win. I think we have all, the United States and our European allies, have been all too tentative in reaching decisions that give the Ukrainians the best chance to win, which is what we all want. Out of some vague notion that we're going to provoke Vladimir Putin, ladies and gentlemen, he's provoked, right? He's provoked. And none of these efforts where we've sort of pulled our punches in the hope that he would somehow change direction have had any impact at all. So I agree with you. I think we ought to be giving them what they need to win the war as soon as possible.
When President Zelensky was in Washington at a press conference with President Biden was asked, why don't you just give the Ukrainians the tools to do the job? And he said, I don't know. I've spent hundreds of hours with our allies, and I don't know if we could hold the EU and NATO together if we did give them those tools. Well, it's quite an admission, wasn't it?
I can't speak for Europe, but it seems to me you don't have to be too smart to figure out that we all benefit from these guys winning and winning quickly. And that's been a problem in my country and in other countries in NATO. The way to win it quickly, as you suggest with your question, to give them what they need to win it as soon as possible.
I couldn't agree more with Senator as well. My job is also to move the pendulum of imagination of my partners in Western Europe to persuade them to deliver more. So I think that the quicker and the sooner and the more we are going to deliver to Ukraine, those Ukrainian soldiers who fight, by the way, with lion hearts, they are going to prevail eventually. But the modern type of battlefield requires lots of ammunition, artillery. This is, by the way, the lesson of this war. And by the way, this 0.2%, which was spent by the United States, partially or was spent on American companies producing those weapons for Ukraine as well. So I think this is all interconnected, and with great leadership of the United States, I do believe that we will be able to deliver enough of weapon, in particular HIMARS, and this type of weapon, which is critically important on the battlefield for Ukrainian troops to win.
Okay, all right. I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Thank you very much to the panel, and thank you to you, the audience.